A Fox News alert, a video surfacing from an ICE agent involved in a recent Minnesota shooting, vividly illustrated the imminent threat the officer faced. This all began with a highly controversial incident in Minneapolis during an immigration enforcement operation. An ICE agent discharged his firearm after a confrontation involving a vehicle, tragically resulting in the death of a 37-year-old woman. Public figures reacting to the new video highlighted the agent's claim of self-defense, arguing that his life was endangered despite initial narratives suggesting otherwise. Federal authorities indeed stated the agent acted in self-defense, yet the incident immediately ignited public scrutiny and widespread protests. Welcome to Border Watch Daily, where we uncover the hidden truths behind the headlines. This event, however, was just a fuse that ignited an investigation far larger and more sinister than anyone could have imagined, exposing how vulnerabilities in the system, including the release of individuals posing significant public safety threats, could pave the way for deeper criminal infiltration. That single shot did not end the operation. It triggered a far broader federal investigation, one that would uncover a vast criminal network, multi-state raids, and corruption reaching into the highest levels of city government. What began as a routine enforcement action would soon unravel a decade-long conspiracy, revealing a shocking truth about who was truly orchestrating the chaos from within. At 3:12 a.m. in South Minneapolis, while the city slept, unmarked federal vehicles silently cut their lights, rolling into position around a 14-story hotel near the interstate. In mere seconds, exits were locked down, elevators frozen between floors, and stairwells secured by armed teams moving with swift precision. Doors were breached without warning. Flashlights sliced through dark hallways as agents shouted commands, forcing occupants to the ground, hands visible as rooms were cleared one by one. The operation ascended floor by floor, leaving no blind spots. In under 45 minutes, ICE, DHS, and DEA detained 236 illegal immigrants, with nearly 180 of them identified as Somali nationals. Luggage was meticulously searched, false identities unraveled. Agents recovered 127 forged passports, stacks of prepaid phones, and envelopes of cash cleverly hidden in ceiling panels. But then, the operation took a far darker turn. Search teams uncovered 39 firearms, including loaded pistols and assault-style rifles. In maintenance rooms and locked suitcases, they seized cocaine and fentanyl meticulously packaged for distribution, not personal use. The cash totals rapidly climbed, surpassing $4 million. What began as an immigration sweep escalated within minutes into something far more profound. The sheer volume of weapons, drugs, and cash unequivocally revealed the hotel was an armed distribution hub, not merely a shelter. In that critical instant, agents realized the city was confronting a major criminal threat, not just an immigration case. By dawn, the hotel raids, revelations began to unfold. Seized phones vibrated incessantly with missed calls, encrypted messages, and delivery schedules frozen mid-sentence. DEA analysts worked tirelessly through the night, correlating numbers, locations, and names extracted from burner devices and falsified travel documents. What initially seemed like scattered trafficking activity started to coalesce into a single organized structure. At its core were two names that defied the typical pattern of street crime. Khalif Nurelm, 45, a Somali-born judge with a seemingly spotless public record, and Hodan Elanour, 42, a licensed attorney practicing immigration and criminal law in Minneapolis. On paper, they were pillars of the community. In reality, investigators believed them to be the network's architects. Evidence recovered from the hotel and linked storage locations suggested the couple had spent nearly a decade constructing a covert pipeline. Somali migrants were smuggled into the United States, provided false identities, and then absorbed into the network as drivers, stash house guards, and couriers. Loyalty was brutally enforced through fabricated debts, threats, and pressure on family members abroad. Their positions afforded them protection. Court access delayed warrants, legal filings stalled investigations, and bribes moved discreetly. Border officers, local police, and even senior law enforcement figures were suspected of being compromised. Drugs flowed north from Mexico and Colombia, then spread outward from Minneapolis across state lines. The FBI linked this network to at least 24 gang-related deaths across Minneapolis, violent incidents previously treated as isolated crimes before the organization was exposed. Investigators later confirmed the corruption extended far beyond law enforcement. Court filings revealed direct links to the Somali-born mayor of Minneapolis, who allegedly provided political cover, delayed enforcement responses, and benefited financially. His subsequent guilty plea would confirm that the network's protection reached the highest levels of city government. As the picture sharpened, surveillance teams detected movement. At 8:21 a.m. at Minneapolis Street, Paul International Airport, Khalif and Hodan arrived separately, carrying minimal luggage, newly issued passports, and one-way international tickets. There were no public statements, no lawyers present. To federal agents, it was unmistakable. They were running ICE and FBI units swiftly sealed off sections of the terminal, tracking the pair through cameras and facial recognition. At 8:27 a.m., just before boarding could begin, agents converged. The arrest lasted a mere 22 seconds, no resistance, no speeches, just handcuffs snapping shut in the middle of the departure hall. With their detention, the network lost its shield. Within hours, prosecutors approved expanded warrants, financial trails were unlocked, and names buried for years surfaced simultaneously. What began as an immigration operation had now fully transformed into a national narcotics conspiracy, and Minneapolis was merely its starting point. At 4 a.m., federal warrants simultaneously went live across 6 states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Michigan. More than 1,200 federal agents surged into position. FBI command centers coordinated real-time feeds as ICE, DEA, and DHS teams moved as a single formidable force. Roads were sealed, power grids monitored, the operation unfolded with military precision. The first breach erupted in northern Minnesota, a reinforced door blown inward. Armed lookouts attempted to scatter, but flashbangs detonated, collapsing resistance in seconds. Gunfire ensued short, violent exchanges inside tight hallways. 2 suspects were shot while resisting arrest, and 1 federal agent took a round to the shoulder, pulled back under cover as the team advanced. At 4:18 a.m. on the outskirts of Milwaukee, a converted auto shop became a battlefield. A suspect opened fire from an elevated platform. Agents returned fire, neutralizing the threat. Inside, pallets of drugs were stacked shoulder high, cocaine bricks stamped and sealed, fentanyl vacuum, packed by the kilogram, all ready for immediate transport. At 4:37 a.m. in South Chicago, simultaneous entries hit an apartment complex across 3 floors. Suspects fled through stairwells and rooftops. One fired blindly through drywall. Another attempted to dump a weapon over a balcony. Agents swiftly pinned them down, secured the building, and commenced methodical searches. Rifles, handguns, and cash were recovered from walls, vents, and floor compartments. By sunrise, the scale was unmistakable. Across 73 raid locations, federal teams encountered barricades, early warning alarms, and weapons pre-staged for immediate use. 4 separate firefights erupted within the first 36 hours. 9 cartel enforcers were killed while resisting arrest. 2 federal agents were wounded, but survived. Arrests mounted rapidly. By the end of day 1, 412 suspects were taken into custody, including over 260 direct cartel operatives. Dozens more were detained for weapons, trafficking, and conspiracy charges. By the end of day 2, total arrests exceeded 640 individuals, many directly tied to interstate drug transport, armed enforcement, and money laundering cells. Seizures mirrored the violence. Convoys rolled out, loaded with tons of cocaine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine. Safes were cracked open, revealing tens of millions of dollars in cash. Armories were uncovered, hundreds of firearms with magazines taped together, ammunition stacked by the crate, digital forensics teams cloned servers on site, freezing transaction ledgers mid-update. What made the fighting even more dangerous was its proximity. Some targets were mere minutes from schools and residential neighborhoods. Drugs were stored beside children's beds, weapons hidden behind false panels in family homes. Every breach carried the severe risk of ambush or civilian casualties. By day 2, Federal Command confirmed it. This was not a local operation. It was a hardened interstate cartel network, prepared for violence and deeply embedded within America's heartland. This was not a sweep, it was a war. As the smoke cleared from the six-state sweep, investigators began reconstructing the network's activities before it ever drew widespread attention. The timeline proved longer and darker than expected. Financial records, encrypted ledgers, and witness testimony revealed the operation had been active for nearly a decade. What started as small-scale smuggling evolved into an industrial-scale pipeline. Drugs moved north from Mexico and Colombia, crossed the border hidden inside commercial shipments, then flowed outward from Minneapolis like blood through arteries. The sheer volume stunned even veteran agents. Analysts conservatively estimated that hundreds of tons of narcotics had entered the United States through this single network: cocaine for speed and profit, methamphetamine for control, and fentanyl for devastation. Each shipment was meticulously broken down, redistributed, and pushed into cities and rural towns across the Midwest. The human cost was starkly measurable. Emergency room data showed overdose deaths in key Minnesota counties had quadrupled over the past decade. In some neighborhoods, fentanyl-related fatalities spiked by more than 300% in just 3 years. Violent crime invariably followed the drugs. Homicides climbed, armed robberies became routine, and tough disputes escalated into drive-by shootings and executions carried out in parking lots and apartment stairwells. Every spike in violence aligned precisely with the network's expansion. Witnesses describe how migrants brought in illegally were forced into roles almost immediately. Some drove shipments, others guarded stash houses. Many were trapped by fabricated debts, threatened with exposure, or warned that family members back home would suffer if they refused. Leaving was not an option. Cooperation was enforced through fear. The drugs did not remain confined to criminal circles. Fentanyl leaked into counterfeit pills sold to teenagers. Cocaine fueled gang violence and elaborate money laundering schemes. Methamphetamine kept users awake for days, hollowing out entire blocks. Social workers described neighborhoods where addiction spread faster than any public health response could follow. Behind it all was relentless discipline. Routes were rotated every few weeks, vehicles abandoned and replaced, communications constantly shifted. When law enforcement pressure increased in one area, shipments were rerouted overnight. The network adapted faster than local agencies could track, until the hotel raid finally cracked the system open. As federal teams mapped the damage, a pattern became impossible to ignore. The violence was not random, the overdoses not accidental. They were predictable outcomes of a machine designed to maximize profit regardless of casualties. In internal briefings, one chilling figure circulated quietly. Tens of thousands of lives impacted, directly or indirectly, by the drugs moved through this single organization. For years, the network operated in plain sight, hidden behind legal titles, community status, and institutional blind spots. Judges signed orders, lawyers filed motions, and police patrols looked the other way. Meanwhile, entire neighborhoods paid the ultimate price. By the time the true scale was fully understood, there was no debate left. This was not just a criminal enterprise. It was a long-running assault on public safety, and the reckoning had only just begun. When police and officials are involved in such schemes, silence becomes deadly. Once the arrest stabilized, the investigation pivoted, turning inward. What agents had quietly feared during the raids was now undeniably true. The network had not survived for nearly a decade through secrecy alone. It had thrived because critical parts of the system designed to stop it had been compromised. Interrogations of mid-level operatives began to align, names repeated, and payments matched bank records. Phone logs connected officers to vehicles that should never have passed inspection. The corruption was not theoretical. It was documented, dated, and signed. Over the next 72 hours, internal affairs units worked in parallel with federal prosecutors. Subpoenas were issued in silence, lockers were searched, and home safes opened as the list of implicated individuals grew longer by the hour. By the end of the week, 12 local police officers had been arrested. Some had accepted cash to ignore traffic stops. Others provided advance notice of raids. One officer even admitted to escorting vehicles he knew were carrying narcotics, clearing intersections under the guise of routine patrol. Then came a name no one expected to see on paper: a sitting police chief. Investigators alleged he had accepted regular payments to redirect manpower away from key corridors and to suppress internal complaints. Emails recovered from archive servers showed deliberate interference in investigations, complaints labeled as clerical errors, and evidence quietly buried. The betrayal cut deep, and public trust collapsed almost overnight. Officers who had spent years on the street found themselves questioned by their own communities. Protests reignited, not just against enforcement, but against the shocking realization that criminals had worn badges. The corruption did not stop at law enforcement. Financial audits uncovered municipal officials who approved suspicious contracts tied to shell companies. Immigration consultants funneled clients directly into the network. Court clerks altered filing dates. Every small favor, every quiet shortcut, added another brick to the cartel's protective wall. In closed-door briefings, prosecutors used one word repeatedly: ecosystem. This was not merely a single bad actor or a handful of bribes. It was an environment where corruption could survive, unnoticed, normalized through routine, and justified as pragmatism. The network paid for silence, and silence became a habit. The consequences were immediate. Entire departments were placed under federal oversight. Pending cases were reopened, and convictions tied to compromised officers were flagged for review. Careers ended in handcuffs, and reputations built over decades collapsed in days. For agents who had fought through gunfire only days earlier, this phase of the operation carried a different, heavier weight. It was easier to confront armed traffickers than to accept how deeply the damage had spread. Yet, this exposure served a crucial purpose. By dismantling the internal shield, investigators ensured the network could not regenerate. Routes stayed closed, replacements failed to move. Without protection, shipments stalled and alliances fractured. The illusion of immunity was gone. What remained was accountability, slow, methodical, and unforgiving. For the first time in years, the system began to clean itself from the inside out. In the weeks that followed, Minneapolis began to transform. The pervasive noise faded first. Sirens became less frequent. Helicopters disappeared from the night sky. Corners once brazenly claimed by dealers fell quiet. Not because fear vanished, but because the supply had been decisively severed. Federal analysts confirmed what local residents were already sensing. The flow of illicit drugs had been interrupted at its source. Within 30 days, overdose admissions in key Minnesota hospitals dropped by nearly 40%. Street-level seizures declined, not due to a slowdown in enforcement, but because the distribution networks had utterly collapsed. Dealers who once operated openly vanished, or turned on each other. Without protection, without product, survival became uncertain. The legal fallout was relentless. Federal prosecutors filed hundreds of indictments directly tied to the network. Charges ranged from narcotics trafficking and weapons violations to racketeering, human smuggling, money laundering, and corruption. Several cases were immediately designated as high-priority national security prosecutions fast-tracked through federal courts. For Khalif Nur El-Meh and Hodan El-Anur, the fall was absolute. Their assets were frozen within hours, properties seized, accounts drained and meticulously catalogued. Courtrooms, where Khalif once presided, became places where his name was spoken only in reference to conspiracy and abuse of power. Hodan's legal credentials were suspended pending disbarment. Her professional legacy erased almost overnight, but the damage extended far beyond two names. Families came forward. Parents who had lost children to overdoses, residents who had fled neighborhoods consumed by violence, migrants who described being trapped in a system they never understood until it was too late. Their stories filled transcripts, affidavits, and closed session testimonies, painting a picture of long-term harm impossible to ignore. Federal officials openly acknowledged the scale. This operation, they stated, was not merely a victory, but a profound warning, a demonstration of how quickly organized crime could root itself inside legal institutions when oversight failed and complacency set in. The cartel had not relied on brute force alone. It relied on trust, on appearances, and on silence. That silence was now irrevocably broken. New oversight measures were announced, joint task forces expanded, and data sharing protocols tightened. For the first time in years, federal and local agencies operated without internal obstruction. The gaps that once allowed the network to thrive were sealed one by one. Still, no one claimed the city was healed. Too many lives had already been lost, too many neighborhoods hollowed out by addiction and fear. The scars would not fade quickly, and some would never fade at all. Yet, something fundamental had shifted. The myth of untouchability was gone. The belief that power, status, or connections could shield criminal empires from accountability had collapsed under the weight of evidence and enforcement. What began with a single gunshot had unraveled a decade-long conspiracy and forced a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. For Minneapolis, and for the states caught in the network's shadow, the message was clear. The danger had been real, the cost staggering, and when the line was finally crossed, the response was absolute. When the final warrants were served and the last evidence trucks rolled out of Minneapolis, something unfamiliar settled over the city. Not relief, not celebration, but a profound silence, the kind that forces a reckoning. For years, danger had moved quietly through courtrooms, neighborhoods, and highways, hidden behind titles, paperwork, and routine decisions no one thought to question. What the investigation revealed was not simply a criminal network, but how close an entire system came to breaking without anyone noticing. This operation proved a hard truth. Institutions do not fail all at once. They erode. One ignored warning, one delayed file, one compromised decision at a time. The network did not rely solely on violence or secrecy, it relied on comfort, on the belief that people in authority could be trusted without scrutiny. That belief became its strongest weapon. The lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. Corruption rarely announces itself. It wears familiarity, it hides in legal language, professional reputations, and closed meetings justified as procedure. When oversight weakens, power stops serving the public and begins protecting itself. By the time the damage becomes visible, communities are already paying the price in addiction, violence, and lives lost without headlines. This case also shattered a dangerous myth that crime exists only at the margins of society. Here, it sat behind desks, signed documents, and issued rulings. The most destructive actors were not those pulling triggers, but those opening doors, delaying consequences, and silencing questions. Law enforcement can confront armed threats. What nearly defeated this system was betrayal from within. Yet, there is another truth in what followed. Once the internal shield was removed, the network collapsed quickly. Routes failed, payments stopped, protection vanished. Accountability, when applied without exception, worked exactly as intended. Oversight restored momentum, and transparency became a deterrent. The system did not heal overnight, but it began to defend itself again. The warning now belongs to all of us. Justice cannot be outsourced to titles or uniforms. It depends on vigilance, on the refusal to accept silence as normal, and on the courage to question authority when facts no longer align. When citizens disengage, corruption gains room to breathe. When scrutiny fades, criminal power grows comfortable. This story does not end with arrests. It ends with responsibility, because the next network will not look exactly like this one. It never does. But the conditions that allow it to grow are always the same.